In today's programme, I'm going to show you what I think is the most deadly method for fishing for carp, and that's feeder fishing and straight lead fishing. Earlier on today, I prepared all the tackle and bait for today's session in the tackle room. Let's go and see what happens. Here I am in the tackle room at Gold Valley with all the tackle that I use for feeder fishing. The reels, the line, the hooks and the feeders. And the feeders is where I'm going to start. I'm going to talk you through the ones that I use. This is a Darwa Harrier feeder. What makes this so good is the volume of bait that you can introduce into your peg. In the summer months when the fish are moving around and feeding, you need to be in and out introducing a large amount of bait into your peg. This one will actually swell up and you can actually get a lot of bait in and introduce a lot of bait very quickly. If you can imagine, I was using that and the angler next to me was using a small feeder. After an hour I'd end up with all his fish in my peg. Moving on, the kind of feeder I'm going to be using today is a Drennan cage feeder. Now there's a lot of reasons I like this. One, they're very durable. They don't bend, they're very, very strong. Two, as you can see, there's a lot of holes in them. If it was a match, I'd be looking at starting on a feeder and maybe switching to a big waggler. The reason these feeders are so good, when they're on impact in the water, some of the bait does come out. As it's sinking, it will take the majority of the bait to the bottom. But if you can imagine, the ground bait will be coming out of that and attracting fish to feed in the top layers. By using a feeder like this, I can kick-start my big waggler peg. Moving on, the Drennan grip mesh feeder, which is probably the most popular feeder used for carp fishing. In the centre of the feeder, there's some small points which hold particles like hemp, meat and corn, so they don't come out on impact. The last thing you really want when you're fishing to an island is when your feeder lands, the bait explodes out. You want the feeder to land, the small points inside hold the bait in. As the feeder lands, then it's released and you've got a small pile of bait on the bottom, and this is the best way to catch carp against islands. The alternative to using a feeder is a straight lead. There's two occasions when I would use this. One in the winter when the fishing is very hard and you're literally just fishing with a hook bait. You don't want to introduce any free offerings at all. The second is with a PVA bag, which I will show you later. I've got a small selection of the leads that I use. Some of them are very big, some of them are very small. Going from the largest one down, that's 1.5 ounces, which is very big, you might think, for match fishing. But when you're faced with a strong side wind and you need to make the distance or you need to make it close to an island, there's nothing worse than not having a lead that's big enough. And I know that that one, with 8 or 10 pound mainline, will still get me the distance and the accuracy that I need. Going down the size, there's 1 ounce bomb. That would be the average size for most of the venues I'd fish. And there's very small ones. A lot of the lakes that I fish, Middle Lake at Gold Valley, they're not very wide at all and you can get away with a very, very small lead. It's not just the size of leads that I think is important, the shape also. If I was going to be fishing a PVA bag up to an island, what I don't want is for the fish, if I'm on a lot of carp, to be nudging the lead and moving the lead down the shelf away from where all the bait is. So I use the flat leads. A lot of people associate these kind of leads with fishing on fast flowing rivers so that they don't roll. The reason I use them on carp lakes when I'm fishing up to a bank or an island is because they lay flat, and when the carp's nudging the PVA bag that's next to the lead, it doesn't actually nudge it and it rolls down, taking the hook bait away from the fed area. So it's not just the size of leads that you need to think about. Also the shape of leads can be crucial. With all my fishing, I look for reliability and durability. For this, the main line for me has to be very strong. On carp waters, not only are you looking to catch big weights of fish, sometimes there's snags, the fish try to get you in bushes, any kind of undergrowth, and you need to keep them away from them. Also, if they do get you in there and you're using a light main line, then the line can be damaged. My favourite reel line is the TDR Competition in 8 and 10 pound. It's very, very strong, very durable, and I know it's not going to let me down. There are some times when I might go down to 5 or 6 pound. This is purely to achieve the distance. But if I was looking at catching a big weight of fish, I'd be very wary about going below 8 pound. Moving on to the hook length material. The line I use is the TDR competition rig line. Not only a very strong and durable line, but the knots are tied very nicely. When you're looking at using the knotless knot or loop-to-loop method, always look for a line that ties nicely and also has a good knot strength. All the lines I've showed you are tried and tested. They're the lines I use to catch big weights on, and I know that they won't let me down, and I know they won't let you down. The hooks I use for feeder and lead fishing depends on what hook baits I'm using. If I'm going to be putting the bait actually on the hook, I'll use a spade end hook. These are my favourite hooks, the G-Point Gamma Power and the Drennan Carp Feeder. Obviously if I'm hair rigging, the knotless knot is the #1 knot for me, so the hook then has to be eyed. If I'm fishing a venue where the carp aren't that big, I use the G-Point Pellet Eyed. This is a finer wire hook than say the Drennan Carp Eyed, but this hook for the smaller pasty sized carp, as we like to call them, is my #1. Probably not quite strong enough for the big fish that hopefully we're going to be catching later on in the session. Moving on to my favourite hooks for the bigger carp, the Drennan Carp Feeder and the Drennan Carp Feeder Extra Strong. Both very good hooks. The Extra Strong is the #1 if you're fishing near snags, anything you need to keep the fish away from islands, bushes, anything like that. For open water, the Drennan Carp Feeder. As you've probably noticed, all of my tackle is very strong and very durable. Not only to get the one carp in that I might hook on a hard day, but to get the last carp I might hook when I'm catching 200 pound. I don't want anything to let me down. Because I'm talking about catching big weights of carp fast, I want a nice strong reel. The reel that I used to use is a TDR. It's a very good, strong, durable reel. You'll notice it's on the smaller side of some of the feeder reels you might see people using. The reel I've started using is the Daiwa Cordia reel. This is a very strong spinning reel. It's a much more powerful version than the TDR, and for me it's the #1. I can reel in fast when I haven't got a fish on, and I can apply a lot of pressure to fish when I have got the fish on. The back wind is easy to find when you're playing a fish. When I'm looking for a bite, I have the back wind on. As soon as a fish is hooked, it's very easy to click the back wind off and play the fish. It's got a very nice clutch for the people that want to play the fish with the clutch. Personally, I prefer to back wind. Also, you'll notice the size of the spool. For casting, a nice big long spool is very important. The last thing you want to be doing is drawing a very good peg on a match, faced with a long cast to an island and your tackle's just not up to it. So make sure you get a very big, durable reel that's up to the job. The rod is probably the most important item of tackle that you can have. The rod I'm using is the Tournament 12-13 foot. The reason I like this rod, by introducing the small piece that's a foot long, I can change the length of the rod in a matter of moments. If the wind gets up, I can add this section and the extra foot's going to enable me to reach the desired area. Another reason why I like it, loaded with the big reel, the heavy line, I need big eyes on the rod to be able to cast a distance. And as you can see, the big bore in these eyes enables me to cast long distances. Moving on to the handle. A nice locking handle. The last thing you want to do is when you're catching big weights of fish or casting a distance is to have your reel moving around. This handle, the reel is locked on tight and it cannot move. One question I get asked a lot of when feeder fishing is what tips do I choose? To me the tip isn't overly important. Certainly not as important as it would be say on a river where bite indication does depend on the strength of your tip. I don't tend to use very heavy tips for carp fishing purely because I want a good bend in the rod. A lot of these carp fight very hard under the rod tip, and I like a nice soft rod that's going to absorb every thud of the carp and not going to pull the hook out. The tip I use is the Daiwa glass tip. It's just a nice soft tip. That's a very good tip to use for carp. I may even use that one in the session later. One of the reasons I don't use a very heavy tip isn't just for bite indication. It's about seeing what fish are in your peg. Line bites, just trying to read what the fish are coming to. If you put a bigger feeder on and you get more line bites, you know the fish are hungry. If you put a bigger feeder on and you get less line bites, obviously then you know the fish are backing away from a volume of bait. It's all small things like this tips are not just there for bite indication. By being a little bit clever and looking at the liners and thinking about it, you can actually work out what the fish want and also how many fish are there. So that's the tips and that's the rod. So this is the reel I'm going to use in today's session. As you can see, the spool is very, very deep. And what I like to do is get the line just level with the lip of the reel. The line that I like to use, which is a TDR competition, comes in 150 metre spools. So there's not quite enough line to fill this. So what I need to do is to put some backing line on to get the line to the required distance from the top of the spool. Now I'm going to spend a little bit of time to show you how I put line on a reel. And the best way is to have the reel on the rod. By doing this, everything's just a little bit more stable and the job is done properly. As you can see, the reel's locked on the rod now. Just open the bail arm. It doesn't matter what backing line you use, the thicker the better, because then you need less of it. And the knot I tie is just a straightforward 3-turn knot, creating the loop. That is then passed over the spool and pulled tight. And then once more the reverse way and pulled tight. That's a very strong knot, it's not going to let you down. Trim it off, not too tight, because it's going to actually be buried under the line. You can see the knot there, very nice and small. Now the way to put your line on is to hold the line above the reel so your hand is almost mimicking the first eye, and then just wind. Just keeping an eye that the line goes on correctly, fills every part of the spool. And that's going on lovely. I'm going to take this up probably to about 4 mil from the top. If I don't quite get the 150 metre spool all on, I know 100 metres is more than enough for the venues I fish. And I'd rather have the distance of line from the lip of the spool dead right for casting, and also to cut down on any other tangles that might occur due to having just purely too much line on the reel. You can see that that's being built up quite nicely now. So again, just taking your time just to check that it's going on right. There's no loops formed. Now that's probably about right. So I'm just going to cut that off. Now the knot you use now isn't really important. I just use a 3-turn water knot. So I've got the main line now. This is the 10-pound TDR that I'm going to be using today. Just take 2 pieces of the line and literally just fold it through the loop twice. Just wet it slightly. You can see that it's a nice small neat knot that's not going to get in the way of anything. You can see there it's been joined perfectly. And again, just looking to take my time, making sure everything's going on correctly. Keeping a little bit of tension with your fingers just to make sure the line doesn't go on too loose. You don't want it flush with the lip. Anywhere within half a mil to a mil of the lip is perfect. And I've got a little trick once the line's on that I use, because you see a lot of people who overload their reels and they end up getting some tangles where the excess line just peels itself off. And there's nothing worse than going to cast and ending up with a bird's nest around the reel. You can see that's run out now, and that is probably perfect. You can see the gap there now between the lip isn't too much, isn't too little, and the line's not going to peel off freely. Now the last thing I do, just to check that the line's on there nicely, take the reel off of the rod, and this is a trick that I learnt from my dad. Just hold the reel, let the line go free, and hold the reel upside down. Now if you can bounce that and the line doesn't peel off freely, you know you've got it about right. If the reel was overloaded, you'd find that the line would just peel off freely, but you can see that I can bounce it up and down, and because it's loaded correctly, it's not coming off. So that's the reel loaded. Just put it behind the line guard and that's ready for use. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually set the rod up for the session, and the first thing I'm going to show you is to tie the hook length. There's two ways I'm going to be fishing today, one with a feeder with hair rig luncheon meat. The second is with a PVA bag and a hair rig pellet. And that's the first hook length I'm going to tie up. The hook length I'm going to be using is 6 pound 020 rig line. Now because I'm using eyed hooks, I'm going to be tying the knotless knot. So the first thing you do is to tie the actual pellet band on. I just tie it into a small loop. This is the strongest knot for this, and also it doesn't weaken the band. As you can see there, the knot isn't formed on the band, it's actually formed away from it, so there's no line cutting into the band. I'm going to use a 14 hook, pass that through the eye and pull it down. Now this is where you need to get the length of your hair right. Because I'm actually going to be using the pellet band over and around the pellet, I want the pellet sitting quite close to the bend of the hook, so I'm not going to have the hair too long. When you're tying your knotless knot, a lot of people do use pieces of rubber to hold the hair against the hook. If you're using 6 or 7 turn knotless knot, this is necessary. Personally, I prefer to use a longer knot, 14 or 15 turns. The knot's slightly longer and it does the job for me. I find pieces of silicone, when you're catching big weights of fish, they tend to rip off. So I know if I tie a nice long knot, that's not going to come off no matter what. So I'm looking at about 14 to 15 turns around the hook, and that's going to hold my hair nice and firmly against the shank of the hook. Just pull that tight, wet it. As you can see there, the knot's been formed very nicely, and the length of the knot is doing the job here what a small piece of silicone would be doing. So that's my number one hook length for pellet fishing. The hook length and setup I use for the meat feeder is very, very similar. The only thing that's different, instead of using a pellet band, I use the small plastic adapters that I can actually push through the meat with a baiting needle. So again, pass it onto the line, tie it into a small loop, again, because you don't want the knot actually forming on the plastic, which can create a weak point. You can see there that it's actually in the loop and there's no actual knot formed against the plastic which can weaken it. So I'll just trim that off, and again the other end. Now because I'm going to be using probably 2 cubes of small 1/8 meat, I'm going to want to tie the hair slightly longer. So I just put the hook on, same size hook of 14. Hopefully we're going to be catching some quite big fish. It's important at this point when you're tying the rig to just hesitate and try and imagine 2 pieces of meat on the hair to get the length dead right. So a little bit longer. Now I know that 2 pieces of 1/8 meat will sit perfectly on that hair. So just hold it now, and again I'm looking for about 15 turns to take up the full length of the shank of the hook, and I know that that's going to hold the hair against the hook perfectly. You can see there that the hair is much longer than the pellet one, but this is to house 2 pieces of meat. Right, I've strung the rod up for the session. I've set it up at the moment at 12 foot. The wind's not too bad, I just had a little look outside. I can always add the 13 foot section if I need to. Taking time, making sure that you pass the line through the centre of every eye. There's nothing worse than getting your rod set up perfectly, going outside it doesn't cast right purely because you've missed out one of the eyes. Now on to the setup. Here at Gold Valley your feeder must be free running, which is the case on most commercial fisheries. And there's quite a few different ways of setting it up. I've messed around with them all, and for me the best way is using a sliding float connector, which is one of these. It's a small gadget from Census. It's a swivel with a small bead with a hole in it. Now the reason this is so good is because it cuts down on tangles on the rig, and also it simplifies the rig. Just by passing this through the line, you can see it's running nice and freely. By using this little attachment, it stops me from having to set a number of rods up. I can change to a straight lead and a PVA bag, straight to a ground bait feeder or a maggot feeder. Now at this point, people would probably be thinking you need to put a bead on or some kind of stopping system, but you don't. That is why this little gadget is so good. The knot I'm going to tie now is just a 3-turn loop. So again, just take the line, 3 turns, just before it's formed, wet it, just to make sure it forms perfectly. You can see there, that's a very good knot. Trim it off, leaving a little bit of a tail of about 2 mil. This is where this little gadget comes into its own. As you can see, it just wedges against the knot. It's a very simple rig, it's very tangle free, and the best thing about it is it's very effective. I can clip a feeder on. The feeder I'll be using today, a small cage feeder. It just clips on perfectly. Very simple, very effective, tangle-free rig. The only thing I'm going to do now is quite a big loop, and as you can see with 8 or 10 pound line, it's quite wiry. So just to tie a very small loop and just pull it tight. You can see there, that's just going to hold my hook length away from the feeder. What I'm going to do now is take the hook length for the luncheon meat, tie it on, again a double loop. Loop to loop's my favourite way of attaching the hook length to the main line. Trim it off. There are many more complicated rigs than this, but to me, nice and simple and effective is the way to go. Loop to loop, pass the hook through, pull it tight, and there you can see the nice wiry line. It's not only strong for catching big weights of big fish, but it also just holds the hook length slightly away from the feeder and creates a very simple tangle-free rig. I've set the rod up with the hook length on, and now I'm going to store the rod away. As you can see, I've taken the feeder off. It's always wise to do this. Some of the feeders have got big leads on, sharp edges, and the last thing you want is them to damage your rod. I'm just going to clip the hook onto that eye and pull the rod apart here, passing the rod up and just tightening it up as I go. Then take the rod apart again there and pull it down, holding it all with one hand, and just tighten up using the excess there. You don't want it too tight, the line, because again, if you have it, say, in a week in the bag and you've got it tight around the end of the eye, you can create a weak spot. 2 rod bands to hold all the line and the sections together. One up slightly further. Just put the hook either on an eye or into the cork of the rod. It's not going to damage itself there. Fold the handle of the reel down and then into a nice bag, taking your time that you don't damage the line or the rod, making sure that the line isn't caught in the zip. You can see there that it's all stored away. It's not going to be tangled, it's not going to get damaged, and that's ready for the session today. When I've used the rod today, I'll put it back in and I'll probably use the same setup at the weekend. The next thing I want to talk to you about is the actual bait I'm going to be using today, the ground bait. Like I said earlier, I touched on the big waggler. If I was going to be fishing a match and maybe switching to a big waggler later, I want a more active ground bait. I'd use the Sensus Carp Fine mixed with, which at the moment is my favourite ground bait, is the Marine. One's a very fish meal mix, one's a very lively high food value mix. These two together creates a good mix for carp. It's a fish meal smell but very active. Today, because it's quite cold outside, I'm not going to be using a big float. I'm just going to use the Marine on its own. Here at Gold Valley, as there's a lot of commercial fisheries, we get a lot of carp anglers. By this I mean the 2-rod buzzer type anglers who use all fish meal baits. They use boilies, they use pellets, and the fish tend to get used to eating these, and that's what they like. So just mimicking a bit what they're doing, I'm going to be using the fish meal bait. So that's the ground bait out of the way. The next thing I'm going to show you is the PVA. The PVA I use is the ESP from Drennan. I've experimented with a lot of different ones, and because it's been quite cold lately, this one dissolves in very cold water very quickly, within 2 minutes, and that's what I want. I don't want to be using a PVA that will go out and after 5 minutes have not have dissolved. So I'm going to show you how I make the bags. One thing when you're making your PVA bags is to be very accurate when you're measuring the amount of pellets that you put in them. For this, I just use the same pole cup as I would use on the pole. I just thought to myself, well, I'm using this pot on the pole and I'm catching plenty of fish, so that volume of pellets must be okay. So I started using that volume of pellets in my bag, making every bag the same size so they cast well, and also you're introducing the same amount of feed every time. Very similar to what you would do on the pole. And it's quite a simple process. Basically, just fill the pot up to the brim every time, pour into the tube. You can see the pellets have come down. Now just pull a little bit of PVA off. Try and condense them as much as you can, because the more they're condensed, the more they're going to burst out of the bag once the bag's in the water. Pull a little bit off and then just pass it through. It's quite fiddly when you start, but you can soon start rattling them off quite quick. Before a match I may well do up to 70 or 80 bags. Just pull the knot nice and tight and you can see the bag there has been formed. Just trim it off with a pair of scissors and that's perfect. Ready to be clipped onto the lead and cast out into the lake. As you can see, there's a few there. Like I've said, before a match, 60 or 70 to do before the match. This just cuts down. Also, if it's raining or you're catching a lot of fish and your hands are wet and there's water being splashed around all over the place, keep them in a nice sealed container, and it's just a matter of opening the container, clipping one on and casting out. So that's the PVA and the ground bait. Well, now I'm going to show you how the PVA reacts in water. To do this, I've got my rig that I'm going to be using later, with the bomb, the attachment that we've talked about, and the hook length. The hook length slightly shorter, that's just to show you the effectiveness in the tank. Now going back to the little attachment, another reason this is very good is to clip your PVA bag onto it. When you're fishing, if you just unclip it nice and gently, you can see there that it's almost like a hook to put the PVA mesh on. Just by hooking it through, get it quite deep, and then just clip the snap swivel back together. You can see that is a finished rig, and this is ready to be cast out. A nice heavy lead with the hook bait not too far away. Now I'm going to drop it in the water, and hopefully we're going to see how it's going to react on the lake bed. If you can imagine, there's carp cruising around on the bottom and just off, and they're looking for a bed of pellets. Now hopefully this PVA is going to dissolve within 2–2.5 minutes, probably a lot quicker. So I'm just going to drop it in. If you can imagine that that's gone to the bottom of the lake, and you can see you're just waiting now for it to react. All being well, the pellets will come out of the PVA and we'll be left with a nice bed of 4mm pellets, and not too far away an 11mm one on the hook. You can see there the PVA's broke and it's releasing the 4mm pellets. Little bits floated up there. You can imagine now the carp coming into that. Now the only time that I'd look at twitching the bait is on PVA. If you can imagine, there's a small pile of 4mm pellets there. I've got a foot hook length on, and I was just to move the lead across the bottom, pulling my hook pellet into the feeding zone where those 4mm pellets are going to be. Basically you can fish without ground bait, loose feeding, at whatever range you want. Now I'm going to show you the feeder rig. I've got the 2 pieces of hair rigged meat on the hook, a nice short hook length and a cage feeder. All I'm going to do now In the ground bait there's a few loose offerings of meat and a few loose offerings of hemp. I'm just going to fill the feeder as if it were when I was fishing. The only difference is some bait would come out on impact, but it gives you a good idea how the feeder works on the bottom. So I'm just going to place it in, and you'll see the hook bait come down right next to the feeder, and immediately the ground bait is breaking up. There's particles coming up, which is what I was talking about, attracting fish if you were going to switch to a big waggler. You can see it's just breaking down nicely. And people again talk about twitching. If I were to twitch the feeder, you can see it coming out now, and the hook bait just moving towards the feeder. It's just a good insight to what actually happens on the bottom. Again, you can see because I'm using a fish meal mix, it's not as active as if I was using the carp mix. This mix just helps keep the fish feeding on the bottom. Well, here we are back on the bank. The first thing I want to talk to you about is my actual setup. When you're feeder fishing, it's important to be comfortable because sometimes there's a long wait for bites. As you can see, I've sat with the wind off my back. Today it's quite cold and I need to be comfortable. Fishing for carp and the bite should be quite positive. Most of the time when I'm fishing for smaller fish, bream and roach on a feeder, I prefer to face into the wind. This is purely because it tightens my tip up much quicker and I can see the smaller indications. But today I've gone for the comfort. The wind's quite cold, we're not going to be getting loads and loads of bites, and I need to be comfortable. The bites we're going to get should be quite good pulls. I'm going to talk you through my setup. I've got a nice sturdy rod rest with a butt rest as well. This is most important. You want to be a little bit away from your rod so you're not knocking it. Any indications on the tip need to be from the fish. I've got an arm coming off the box with a Team Dawa rest. The rest is nice and positive. I can't get the line caught anywhere on it. It's nice and positive and secure. You can see I've got a front bar in from a keep net. Again, it's slightly away from myself. It's important to have nothing in this area here for the line of the reel to get caught on. The last thing you want to do is to get a bite, pick the rod up and the line's caught either around your keep net or something like that. Moving on to the side tray. I've got a nice big side tray, not only for the bait but for the different tackle that I'm going to be using. For my feeders, for my spare line, for my hooks, everything's to hand. The landing net's nice and to hand. It's not going to get blown away. It's on my side tray. All my tackles around me, everything's to hand. It's most important when you're feeder fishing to be comfortable. The times to fish the feeder, obviously the weather does dictate this. If you're on a pole venue and the wind was very strong and it's hard to hold your pole, quite often you're better off getting comfortable and fishing a straight lead or even a little feeder rather than struggling on the pole. You're going to miss bites, you're not going to be able to hold the pole as well. So my advice would be to get side on, get nice and comfy and to fish the straight lead or the feeder. This is the ground bait I'm going to use today. It's a Sensus Crazy Bait Marine. It's quite a high percentage of fish meal in this mix, but I know the carp in this lake are quite partial to this. Again, because it's going to be hard, I'm not going to be using a massive feeder. I'm not going to mix up a load. One bag is more than enough. Just empty it into your mixing bowl, and then I'm just going to add a little water. Most of the time when I'm mixing ground bait, I prefer to use a drill. When you're only mixing a very small amount, it's easy to mix it by hand. This particular mix mixes up nice and fine. There's no need to sieve it. It really is an easy ground bait to mix. Just add a small amount of water and just mix round. Like I say, it's ground bait. It's just one of those ground baits that's very, very easy to mix. Doesn't require sieving. You can see straight away you can form a nice ball. You want it quite sticky because we're going to be casting a fair way out to the middle of the lake today, so I don't want it coming out of the feeder on the cast, so I'm going to look to mix it reasonably wet today. When I'm fishing the feeder today, in the actual feeder, I'm going to put a small amount of hemp and some loose offerings of meat to go with the meat hook bait. So again, it needs to be quite sticky just to stop those loose offerings from flying out. Like I say, the weird thing is with ground bait, you get some ground baits that are very easy to mix and some ground baits that aren't. One of the reasons I like this isn't just because the carp obviously are fond of it, it's because it's very easy to mix. You can see there's no need to riddle it, there's no big lumps, and it's virtually ready for use already. Add a tiny more water. And you can see that mix is ready to use. A few small lumps in it, but nothing that's going to put the carp off. If you're really fussy and you wanted to riddle it, you could, but to be fair, after it's been riddled, it's not going to look a lot different. So that's the ground bait. Again, if you were fishing in the summer and you weren't fishing so far out, you could mix it not quite as wet. This will enable it more to come out on impact and maybe to be able to fish over the top and catch the fish shallow on a waggler. Today, it's not going to be that good. The weather's quite cold and against us. So a nice sticky ground bait that's going to carry all the loose offerings to the bottom. We can tighten up and just be patient and wait for the rod to go round and result in a carp. So that's the ground bait. People often ask me what distance to fish at with the feeder. Obviously, if you're faced with an island peg, you need to be fishing up to the island when it's warmer. Today at Gold Valley, I'm faced with just open water, but distance is still very important. If you could imagine, the pegs here are probably 10-12 metres apart. If it was a match situation, the only advantage I can get is to go further. The rope's probably about 50 to 55 yards here, so it's still quite a good cast. If it was a match conditions, I'd be looking at fishing about 5 metres from the rope. The reason for this being, if I go right to the rope, obviously the anglers on the other bank can then cast right to the rope and we'd end up fishing on top of one another. So today I'm going to look at fishing probably 5 to 6 metres short of the rope. Accuracy to me is very important. Not so much when the fishing is hard or when you're fishing a straight lead, but when you're fishing a feeder and you're looking to build up your swim. Another thing I like to pick is a far bank marker. Try and pick something that won't move. Don't pick an angler or a car that can obviously pack up or drive off. Today there's a nice silver birch on the far bank and I can pick this out every time with just a quick glance. So always pick a marker that isn't going to move. Secondly, if you can get the distance right with the line clip, it's most important to use a line clip. A lot of people are quite afraid of this purely because of the fish they're fishing for, carp. They tend to pull hard. But with the heavy line and the stiffer rod, you're not going to have many problems. By keeping the rod low when the rod goes round, 99 times out of 100 the carp will start coming towards you. It's always a good idea before the match to pick the marker and to clip up, and that's the next thing I'm going to show you. So now I'm going to go about getting my distance and getting my rod clipped up. Like I say, I've picked a far bank marker. I know roughly where I want to cast. Just a couple of quick tips. As you can see, I've got quite a large lead on. This is to mimic the size and weight of the feeder I'm going to be using. Don't try and get your clip with a very small bomb and then put a big feeder on and cast, because the distance you achieve will be different. Also, there's no hook length. The last thing I want to do is to cast out first cast, maybe cast further than I think and hook the rope, or hook a snag and lose a hook. So no hook length. Like I say, I've picked a far bank marker and now it's just a case of casting. I don't like to wind the weight or the feeder much more than a metre from the top. By doing this, it gives me a nice swing. Concentrating on the marker, not looking behind me. When I get the rod behind me, I'm looking always at the marker. And with my left hand, this is where the power of the cast comes, to pull the rod towards you as you push with that hand. So again, I'll demonstrate the cast. I'm looking at the marker, say the feeder was full, and again, a nice hard punch. Lift the rod up, and you can see that the clip that I've had on from when I've fished before, I'm probably about 4 or 5 metres short of the rope. So I'm going to take the clip off, 2 or 3 winds, and then clip up again. It's important when you're casting a feeder to be very, very positive. Actually fire the feeder out and punch it out. What you'll find is on a nice calm day you can lob the feeder out and get it quite accurate. But when there's a side wind, you really need to be forcing the feeder out. So again, just to make sure, I want to be out near the rope. I'm looking at my far bank marker and a nice positive punch of a cast. Lift the rod up, and that is absolutely bang on. Now you might have seen then when I hit the clip that the rod is up. The reason for this is I get 1 or 2 turns of line on my reel to actually play the carp with. If by any chance the rod goes round and the carp wants to run, I've got 1 or 2 turns of line on my reel to play with, which will give me time to get my clip off. So I'll just run you through that once more, and you'll see that the rod is vertical when the weight hits the clip. Again, a nice solid cast, and you can see then I've got 1, 2 turns, put the rod down, and then I'll be fishing. One other thing I'd like to touch on, because I've got a good weight on, I do know these lakes pretty well. I know it's about 7 foot deep where I'm going to be fishing in a nice flat bottom. But with a nice heavy lead, you can actually feel what the bottom is. And you can see there it's bouncing along and it's actually gravel. Sometimes if you're looking for a softer bottom or a harder bottom, depending on what venue you're fishing, by using a heavy lead you can determine what the bottom is quite easily. So I'm all clipped up, the bait's already mixed up. I think we should get on now and hopefully try and catch some carp. So I'm all ready to start the session now. I've put the feeder on, a medium cage feeder. The reason for this, like I said earlier, it's quite cold. The fish aren't going to be crawling up the rod, so I'm not going to go mad with the bait. I've also got the backup method of the PVA bag, which I think today will be the #1 method. I'm not going to be in and out as often as I probably would be in the summer. In the summer I'd look at using a big feeder, introducing a volume of bait every cast. Even if the fish weren't there, I'd be almost guaranteed that they would arrive by keep putting the bait in, keep putting the bait in. Today, like I said, it's not the warmest of days, and it's going to be more of a cast out and sit and wait for anything up to 1/4 hour, 20 minutes. Wait for some liners, wait for some signs, and build a little area up and hopefully catch a few fish over it. I'm going to start on double meat. The needle just goes into the end of the quick stop, and then 2 nice pieces of meat. Pull the needle out, then the quick stop is so. Here at Gold Valley you do have to use a hook length of 1 foot. As you can see there, it's just over 1 foot, just to keep in with the rules. The last thing I want to do is fall foul having a hook length that's too short. I'm going to put a few bits of meat and ground bait in the feeder and then cast it out to the area that I've chosen. So again, just wind it up close to the top of the rod, looking at the far bank marker, and a nice positive forward motion. Lift the rod up, and that was absolutely perfect. I've got a couple of turns on the reel should I hook a fish that wants to take some line. Immediately start tightening up, getting that line sunk. Once all your line is sunk and you can see the line coming in, sinking quite rapidly, you can then tighten up. Like I say, I'm going to be looking at leaving it out there for quite some while each cast, depending on how many fish I catch. Obviously if there's a lot of fish, then I'm going to be in and out quite often purely because of the volume of fish I'm catching. If it's a hard day and I'm looking for 4 or 5 or 6 fish, then I could sometimes leave it out there, for up to half an hour at a time, just waiting for a fish to try and find that little pile of bait, get confident feeding, and hopefully pick my hook bait up, and that should result in a pull round. But again, I'm looking for any kinds of signs of fish, any little line bites, any other movements on the tip that's going to tell me that there's fish in the area. Also, it's a good guide if you don't get any indications. Say for instance I've fished for half an hour or 40 minutes and I haven't had any liners, but people on PVA bags around the lake are catching fish, then I know there's a good chance that the fish are shying away from the feeder or the ground bait, and that PVA could be a better bet. Just touching on distance again, like I said, here at Gold Valley there's a rope down the middle of the lake, and it's always a good bet to start slightly short. The reason for this is not only can the people opposite then not get near to where you're fishing, but it gives you that little bit of extra room, if the feeder's not working, to go past your bait and fish for the odd fish on those harder days. When we talk about bite registration, obviously how much you tighten up can have a bearing on what the bite will be like. As you can see, I've got quite a bit of tension on the tip at the moment. This is so when the fish picks the bait up it can feel the resistance. Also the angle of the rod. I like to have the rod at a good angle so I've got the full bend of the rod. There's nothing worse, and we've all done it, you get distracted in a match when you're not catching so many fish. You start looking around and you look back and your rod's all slack, and this is where a fish has picked it up, pulled your rod round when you've not been looking, and it snapped you. By using the whole of the bend of the rod, quite often the rod can absorb the bite and you'll look back and the rod will just be round and you can pick up and the fish will still be on. When you're feeder fishing, it's about being very patient, but the last thing to do when you do get that bite is to panic. I see so many people get the first bite of the day, they pick the rod up, the rod's already round and they absolutely slam into the fish, and this can result in getting snapped. Like I said earlier in the tackle room, I don't like to move the feeder that much. If I were on a PVA bag, then I may well move it 10 or 12 inches just to get my hook bait a little bit more in the vicinity of where the loose offerings were. When I'm feeder fishing, except when I'm fishing for bream, but for carp, I like to let it land, tighten up to it and leave it and be patient. Wait for the carp to come and find it. By doing this, I find you get more bites. If you start moving the feeder, you're never too sure where the hook bait is in relation to the actual loose feed. When it lands, I know that it's going to be pretty much in the area. The hook bait's going to be pretty close to the feeder and pretty close to the bait that was in the feeder. Thing is, when you're feeder fishing, quite often parts of the match will be slow and parts of the match will be very hectic. So it's important not to lose confidence when you've made your mind up and you're just going to fish the feeder or the straight lead. Always be confident that the fish can arrive at any moment. On these commercial fisheries, you don't need lots and lots of bites. 8, 10, 12 bites in a winter's match can be more than enough to win. So even with an hour and a half, hour to go, can quite often have 1 or 2 fish, and then the fish turn up, and with the tackle that we're using, hopefully we'll be able to more than make the most of it. As far as the size of feed is concerned, obviously when it's hard, more than changing the size of the feeder, you'll be looking at coming off it and going onto a straight lead. This is purely to introduce less bait into the swim. However, if I were to start on a medium feeder like today, and we're to be catching lots and lots of fish, I'd be tempted to go to a bigger feeder to introduce more bait and keep the fish in the area where I'm fishing, and not run the risk of people around me feeding more and taking the fish off of me. So you always want to be thinking about how much bait you're introducing, not only are you introducing enough, but are you introducing miles too much? The beauty with feeder fishing for carp and straight lead fishing for carp is that you reduce the amount of carp that you foul hook. You can also introduce a volume of bait. I've been on pegs in the past that are only 15 or 16 metres wide to an island, and I've still chosen to fish the feeder. The reason behind this, there's a fish there, immediately first cast on the ground bait feeder. The reason behind the fact that I prefer feeder fishing to pole fishing a lot of the time is purely because you just don't foul hook the fish. You can wait, and once you've been fishing a feeder a bit, just click the back wind off. Once you've been fishing a feeder a bit, you can distinguish the bites from the liners very easily. And the one thing that carp love is food, especially when it's warm and they're having a go. They love food. So the feeder, you're able to introduce large amounts of bait and not foul hook the fish. You'll find that if you're fishing a pole in 2 foot of water and introducing a large amount of bait, you can quite often end up foul hooking one every cast, striking at false indications that just aren't bites. But with the feeder fishing, you just wait. Like I did then, I had 2 or 3 little indications, and then all of a sudden, before I could blink, the rod was getting pulled in the lake. And it's a sign that it's a proper pull round, a proper bite. Double luncheon meat, medium feeder, just taking my time with the fish. First cast, probably been out there about five or 6 minutes, and this fish found it. There's other anglers on the lake that I can see since I've been here haven't caught any fish. Okay, so taking your time. Nice small common just to start the day off with. Taking my time, keeping the rod nice and high when the fish is in range. The fish runs to the side, putting the rod down, trying to get it back in close towards me. See, it's not the biggest fish in the lake, but it's not the smallest. The fish comes in front of me, lift the rod to try and get it up to the surface to net the fish. See a nice bit of bend in the rod there. Using the rod to tire the fish out. It's not ready yet, not by any means. It's quite a strong fish. You quite often find that on the feeder, it's them smaller fish that really pull hard, and you get the ones that are 7, 8, 9, 10 pound. They're much more sluggish. You can see this one's really putting up a good account of itself. But again, like I touched on earlier, the one thing you don't want to do is start bullying the fish, because on these commercials, say today was a match on Syndicate, 50 or 60 pound would be a very good weight, which is probably only 10 or 12 fish. So I'm not prepared to start rushing and pulling the fish's head off. Just trying to land every fish. You see him come up then. Just get the landing net ready. Waiting for him to come up. And there he is. First cast of the day. Everything I've showed you's come together. The setup, the rod, everything. If this was a match, we'd be 10 minutes into the match and well on our way with a nice carp, a short dumpy common of probably, well, certainly over 5 pound. What a start. Another one there, second cast on the ground bait feeder. 2 or 3 little indications, just nice and steady. The rod's away from me on the rests. I wasn't panicking, just sitting there watching the tip, and all of a sudden, again, the rod was round. Fantastic start to the session this. 2 casts, 2 fish hooked, although I haven't landed this one. yet. It's just a very good sign. I really did think, with it being cold lately, that we were going to struggle to put some together, but it brings me on nicely to the whatever you do, don't get carried away, because I've had it before in matches where I've cast out, caught 2 or 3 fish quick, all of a sudden I've got a big feeder on, I'm in and out like a madman, and that's been the end of my day. One lesson I've learned is just catch the fish as they want to come to you. If you started and you're catching fish, don't change anything. Just keep catching the fish. Don't go mad. Don't try and force the peg. Be quite easy now to think, right, I'm going to put heavier line on, I'm going to put a bigger feeder on, and I'm going to try and empty the lake. You could do that and miss out on the match by not too much at all. So it really is a case of just landing every fish and not going mad. Another nice carp. Nice small common. Bit of ghosty in this one. Again, probably just under 4 pound. But an absolutely cracking start. Hooked right in the top lip. Easy to unhook. Easy to handle. Now again, as I've shown you on a lot of my DVDs, and you might have seen with the first fish, it's easy to pick the fish up and put into the net. I've fallen foul of it before. I picked the fish up, gone to put it in the net, dropped the fish and lost the fish. Although I did it last time, we all learn the best way to do it is to leave the fish in the net and pass the fish into the keep net like so. Not only does it guarantee that fish counting at the end of the match, because you're not going to drop it back, but you're not going to damage the fish. Now this is a good time to talk to you about when to be fast in fishing. I've touched on the fact that you've got to be patient, you've got to wait for those bites. The time to be quick when fishing like this is baiting up, filling your feeder out and casting out accurately. That's the time to be fast. The time to be slow and patient is when you're waiting for the bite and when you've got that bite. The last thing you want to do, having waited 20 minutes, half hour for a bite, is to try and crank that fish in to get out and get another one, because quite often you'll lose it. Again, touching on the side tray and my setup, everything's to hand. I don't have to reach miles to pick something up. I'm not looking for something. Everything's to hand. I can just pick the meat up, 2 pieces of meat on the hair that we tied earlier in the shop, put them on, put the needle where I know it's going to be safe, which is in the luncheon meat, 3 or 4 pieces of meat in the ground bait, and you can see that's nice and quick, purely because everything's to hand. Again, wind the feeder up to about 1 metre. Immediately when I look round, I'm looking for the far bank marker. I've got it in my eye, I don't look backwards, a nice solid cast, and that's bang on. You can see then I had a couple of turns. That's just an added bit of security. If I happen to hook one of the lake's big fish, they're in this lake well in excess of 20 pounds. And if one of those happens to pick it up and you haven't got those 2 turns just to get your clip off, then you could be in trouble. There's another one there immediately. Unbelievable, this feeder fishing. Carp haven't really got a chance when you're nice and prepared and patient and comfortable. Just click that back wind off. Again, I had 3 or 4 indications there where if I had my hand on the rod, I might well have struck just out of instinct or just out of habit. But all of a sudden, the rod was probably 2 foot round and almost going off the rest. Another carp. Fantastic fishing. Nice and comfortable. Wind's getting up now, so if this was a match it would be an even better decision having fished just the feeder, getting comfortable. People that were fishing the pole would now just about be thinking, I think I'm going to go on the feeder because I can't achieve the presentation that's needed to do well. And like I've said a couple of times already, if this was a match, I'd be well in with a good chance of framing, if not winning, because I've got off to the best possible start. 3 casts, 3 carp. Just plodding around in close, being nice and gentle. Again, it's not a race because the next bite might not come for a bit. See, that's a lovely common, that one. Probably 5.5 pound. Again, still fighting in the net. See the hook right in the corner of its mouth there. Just take that out. See this nice common carp on the feeder. 3rd cast, 3rd fish. Absolutely perfect. These are the bread and butter size carp you want to win the matches. 4 to 5 pound. If you get comfortable, fish nice and accurate and your gear's strong, 20 bites could well result in 20 of these. Absolutely perfect match fishing. Two nice bits of meat. When you're casting a distance, it's important to make sure that the stop goes straight through the middle of the meat. This gives it maximum durability for casting and landing. You know it's going to stay on. And immediately looking at the marker. Perfect. There's another one there. I'm quite surprised how well they're coming to the ground bait. With it being cold, I thought the PVA was going to be the number one. It's not to say it still wouldn't be better, but I'm not prepared to change. Not millions out there, I'm having to wait. Really is a deadly method, this. Just taking my time. When the fish wants to come, just bringing it in. It's just nodding its head now. Still a fair way out. Could be a slightly bigger fish. Just starting to move a bit now, this fish. Quite often hard to tell how big the fish is until you get it in close. It's moving fast like a small fish, but it feels quite heavy, so at the moment I'm not too sure, but it's certainly not smaller than the first 3. One thing while I'm playing this, as you can see, it's gone off to my left a little bit. One thing I don't like doing is changing the angle of the rod too much. However, if it was a match and there was people sat all around me, I wouldn't have a lot of choice. One thing when you're changing the angle of your rod is not to do it quick, is to do it nice and slow. So I'm just going to change it now over to my right hand side. Again, I'm not going to make it a sharp movement. I'm literally going to almost pace myself, so I'm not really turning that hook sharp and fast. As you can see there, it's a nice smooth action. It's not to upset the fish and not to affect my hook hold on the fish too much. I see people changing the angle of the rod very quickly, and quite often that affects the hook hold and results in a fish lost. Like I've said time and time again, it's not a race. This is the time to be slow, methodical, and make sure that the fish ends up in the keep net. You can see him starting to go again now. Just let him go. All the tackle's heavy enough, the fish isn't going to break you. The worst that can happen is it pull off. And by not pulling hard, you're eliminating that problem as much as is possible. Obviously, if you get a bad hook hold, the fish can always come off. I've had days before when fish have come off for no reason, and I can just put it down purely to bad luck. This fish is within netting distance now, so it's time now to start lifting the rod and seeing if the fish is ready to be netted. He's going to come up. Feels a good fish now, this. Feels a good heavy fish. It's a nice big swirl. Again, I'm starting to reach for my landing net. I know where my landing net is. Another nice big swirl. And again, not bullying the fish too much. Waiting for the fish to come up. Using the bend of the rod. I need another turn on my reel. But again, at all times being wary that I don't want to pull the fish too hard. He's just plodding around in close and he should just pop up any minute. Very easy at this point to start pulling harder and harder and harder. See him there, he wants to go. Just by lowering your rod. Now he's stopped again. I know now. You have to be very careful at this stage that the fish doesn't pull off. It easily happens even if you're not pulling too hard. So again, just take your time, playing the fish till it pops up on surface, and then net the fish at the first possible safest opportunity. Really is a strong fish, this one. He doesn't want to come up at all. I'm not going to get carried away. I'm saying to myself all the time, don't pull too hard. You need this one. What a perfect start to the match this would be. And you'd certainly have your competitors worried. And the last thing you want to do is to lose it. It's just starting to go. Put the rod down nice and low and you'll see immediately he stops again. There's no rush. This fish could be 7 or 8 pound. By the feel of it, it's over 5 pound. Sometimes those mad long commons can put up a good account of themselves and end up not being that big. But again, I just want to land the fish and make sure he ends up in the net. Looks quite a good fish. He's definitely tiring a bit now. Saying that, he starts to go. Just put the rod down low and immediately the fish stops. Don't be afraid to put your rod tip in the water if the fish is really running hard. Don't be afraid to use your left hand just to steady the rod butt. Sometimes when you've been playing a fish for a while, your hand can start to ache, and just by using the other hand, just to take the weight of the rod, can give you that little rest. Yeah, it's a good fish. Look at that for a nice common. All of a sudden he's popped up and he's in the net nice and safely. A fish of around 8 pound. 5th cast, 5th fish. Perfect fishing. There we go, 5th cast, 5th carp. Probably about 7 pound. Put up a real good account of itself in close, but with a good hook hold, strong line, good rod, good reel, and patience, we landed it quite safely. This was a match, 5th cast, 5th fish. Absolutely perfect. Lovely common carp. That's the 5th carp in the net. Again, I'm not going to get carried away, just plod along. Well on your way. 20 carp in this lake's in excess of 80 pound. Well on the way to achieving a good weight on what is a very cold day. PVA's been the way forward here lately, but it just goes to show that you can't ever discount the ground bait feeder approach. The carp in this lake have been fished for with ground bait for years and years, and they love it. Again, a nice cast, hold the rod up, hit the clip, sink the line. I've got 1, 2 turns. I'm putting the rod down. With the butt rest as well, everything's away from me. I'm not going to knock the rod accidentally. I'm not going to drop the rod. Everything is nice and stable, nice and secure. I've got both my hands free. If I needed to tie another hook, if I needed to play with my ground, but immediately there was a liner there then. Again, this is talking about accuracy. I know that feeder then landed exactly where I've been fishing. There's bait there from the 5 previous casts, and there's obviously carp feeding on the bait there. Just going to tighten up a tad more. There. 3 or 4 liners already this cast. If I'd have cast 6 or 7 metres away, or even 2 or 3 metres away, I wouldn't have had those indications. And I'm pretty confident that there's going to be some fish right around my bait, purely because of the accuracy. Rod's nice and secure, it can't get blown away. Any indication, it's not going to be me knocking it with my knee. Also, it leaves my hands free if I were to be feeding a margin line or catapulting bait out to a waggler line. It's just a nice sturdy setup. Everything's right, nice and comfortable, nice and patient, just waiting for those good solid pull rounds. Another fish there. Feels like a good fish. Again, you'll notice that I'm using the back wind instead of the clutch. The reason for this is purely because I'm in control all the time. The clutch, you have it set at one setting. Sometimes, in my experiences, it can be too much and sometimes not enough. At any time I can put any amount of pressure on the fish, and I want another nice, look like a common. Yeah, it's a bit bigger, that one. Well on our way to building a decent weight. Lovely looking fish. Looks right in the corner. Place him in the keep net. Things have slowed down quite considerably. The wind's got a lot colder. I just had about 20 minutes longer on a ground bait feeder with no response. As you can see, I've changed to a straight lead now. I'm going to try the PVA approach. Small bag full of 4mm pellets. One little trick I want to show you is how I actually put the pellet on. As you can see, if I were to band a normal 11mm pellet, the band would stand out quite well. Also, casting quite a distance here at Gold Valley, it'll be quite easy for it to come off. Just a little trick I do, a small file, and file a groove around the pellet for the pellet band to go in. You can do these at home before you actually start, or when you're waiting for a bite. It doesn't need to be very accurate, just a small groove for the pellet band to sit in. And you'll see that with a nice sharp file you can get the groove. Don't want it too deep, just to house the pellet band. And you can see now when I put the pellet band on, not only does it get a much better grip on the pellet because it's in a band, but it's much harder to see. So that's the hook bait on the hair rig that we tied earlier. Just unclip the bomb and the bag. Again, when you're casting a distance, to hook the bag nice and deep, get it on there so it can't rip off on cast. Clip the swivel back on, and now it's ready to be cast out to the zone. Again, looking at the marker, a nice positive punch, and that is bang on. Because I have caught quite a few on the feeder, I'm not going to give this that long. If I don't get one in, say 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, I'm going to go back on the feeder. Feeder's produced quite a few bites for us today on a very cold, hard day when other anglers on the lake have struggled. So I'm not prepared to give it too long. However, if it were to go round within 5 or 10 minutes, it could mean that that's what the fish want, and I'll be more than prepared to give it another go. Little indication then, could be a carp in the vicinity. Just nudging that bag, trying to get the pellets out. Another little tiny indication then. Really is a case of studying the tip and being patient. There we go. First cast on the PVA. Unbelievable. Been fishing the feeder for about 20 minutes without response. Only had one liner in 20 minutes on the feeder. Changed to the PVA. Probably been out there 4 to 5 minutes. And immediately 2 or 3 liners, and then the tip flew round. Could be a good change. Could be the kind of change that means the difference between doing okay and winning the match. Got a feeling from now until the end of the session we're going to pick a few off on this PVA, where if I'd have stayed on the feeder maybe we would only have caught 1 or 2 more. But on this I'm sure we're going to end up with 2, 3 or 4 more fish. Taking my time. Again, gets close to the end of the session, the fish are harder to come by. You're better off playing every single one. Just goes to go out again. Just taking my time. Strong fish, this one. It's not a massive fish, one of those mad 3 or 4 pounders I think. From he's right down by the keep net, going nodding around. To be careful on this straight lead because you need quite a size weight to get it out to the desired area. With that ounce and a bit bomb banging around, can sometimes just loosen that hook. Again, it's not a massive fish, but just taking my time. Steering him away from the right in the edge where there might be a bit of rubble or even some tree roots. See him now, he's up on top and in the net. Well worth the change. Sitting there thinking about it, changed and results in a fish immediately. Nice fish. Again, hooked right in the corner of the lip. It's good fishing. Again, just repeat the process. Try and be nice and fast and efficient. Really deep hook the bag. Casting quite a way today and I don't want it to come off. Just click the swivel back open, back over. Again, immediately looking at the marker. Nice positive cast. Perfect. 2 or 3 turns of the reel just to make sure I've got that added security. You can see now I'm going to turn around. If I were to leave the box lid off my PVA, there's a good chance if I netted another fish or we had a bit of rain that they could be destroyed. So nice bait box, actually a pellet bait box from Drennan. No holes in the lid, it's absolutely airtight. I know they're going to be fine for the next cast. That bag would have well dissolved by now. Just waiting for a carp to find a little pile of pellets and hopefully the hook bait. One there on PVA. Just click that back wind off. Just go nice and gently, trying to get it in, kiting off a bit to the right. Keep the rod tip nice and low. Just trying to get the fish in close. Always like to keep the rod tip nice and low. Woken up a bit now, this fish. Keeping a nice bend in the rod. Not a massive fish, I don't think. Seems to have woken up a bit lately though. It feels a bit heavier than it did. Again, just before that fish gave me a nice positive pull round, I had 2 or 3 indications where it was just pecking at that little pile of pellets. The fish is in close now. Again, just using the rod, trying to tie the fish in the rod high. He's in close. And there he is. Nice big common. Sorry, a nice big mirror on the PVA bag. Just changed from a small feeder after not catching so many to a PVA bag, and immediately a nice mirror carp is the result. PVA. Nice fish in match conditions. 15 or 20 of those is about all you need. There we are, nice net of fish after a few hours on the feeder and the ledger. Started off on the feeder, seemed to turn the swim on very quickly with the ground bait. Towards the end of the session, changed to a PVA bag, and it got us those few extra fish. There's about 15 fish there for about 70 to 80 pound, which on a cold, hard day would have been more than enough to frame, maybe even win the match. Lovely day. Let's get these fish back. Get them all back nice and safe. Ready for next time. Brilliant. Absolutely perfect match fishing.